The people that operate the studios, they're the artisans. These are people whose techniques and approaches to using technology are highly informed by the cultural references and callbacks. If our culture informs the way that technology is used, you would think that that would be employed when we make the better beat machine. Analog tape and Black music are married together in a very unique way, because it isn't long after that that the race records begin to circulate on radio once we get AM radio in America. So when people say, oh, there's only so much money left in it, actually, no. You can only exploit 1 micron of an idea for so long before it just peters out.
Today, we're talking about modern music gear and culture. That's kind of the anchor point of the conversation. And me and you had some conversations already about this, and you had some really good points, and it inspired this whole topic. Why does music gear today lack culture, in your opinion?
I think that in particular, because I can speak for myself, I don't want to speak for other people, but as a person that's been a participant in hip hop culture since pretty much their childhood, I think when it relates to like our music, equipment now does not necessarily integrate our culture into it in the way that it should, right? Like there are ways to exploit culture, but then there's also ways to holistically include culture in the way that you do things. And so I feel like there's a portion of this where the people who actually are the architects of the various movements of hip hop, because there's the founding architects and then there's the next consecutive generations of them. Part of the issue I have is that we are the vanguards of our culture, right? And so if our culture informs the way that technology is used, it would make a lot of sense, strictly from an academic standpoint, but also from an engineering standpoint, to incorporate like, okay, like the same way that like a bicycle changed to be better once we started racing them, right? So we started making lighter bicycles, and we noticed the way that people cycle on the bike. So they rock it back and forth a certain way. And so they started trying to find lighter and lighter materials that were rigid, but also made it where you can go faster and more aerodynamic, right? You would think that that would be employed when we make the better beat machine. They would go to the people who have developed these techniques, these strategies and these routines, and said, how do you make a beat?
Yeah.
What do you listen for first? What are the things that make your thing good, right? And instead, it's still kind of like the pilgrims with the natives. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's
Absolutely.
Still like, you live over here and we're over there, but we need you. But we only come to take and give the least amount back so that we can go and now be like, yeah, we have beans and corn on Thanksgiving too. And it's like, well, where did that come from?
Right.
Whose idea was that to make succotash? You know what I'm saying? So like, true story, right? So like there's this ideology there where like, as long as we can get people to give up their culture for free, we don't owe them anything in return. But to someone's detriment, it's like simply looking at a treasure map and not realizing that there's alligators and mermaids and sea monsters along the way. Because if you live there, you knew that. But because you don't, that's why your ship is at the bottom of the ocean with the octopus, the giant octopus and the giant squid. You understand what I'm saying? So I feel like that's where, like, in some of our previous conversations, we talked about the stagnancy in equipment development. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Right. The further and further you get away from the source, the more diluted and the more diffracted everything becomes. And eventually it peters out. And so that's why culture is important in that regard.
What I found interesting about your company is that there are definitely some culturally coded aspects of it that are very prominent, and then maybe some of them that are maybe like not as prominent that I think people should know about. But how does culture inform the equipment that you've been designing?
Well, to condense it into something that's easy to digest, making hip hop music requires various skill sets that are all very highly technical, right? But they're informed with a cultural compass that, helps to like carve that into something that's very uniquely part of hip hop culture, especially like the innovations and genius of African Americans and what they did to found hip hop, along with the participation of, Afro-Caribbean people, Latino people, Afro-Latino people, Asians in that regard too. But, at the core of it, there's the African-American ingenuity, which can't be overlooked, right? So like some of the things that we do when we're making hip hop is not even discussed at all in other genres, such as how to make things off on purpose is a big one, right? Like everybody turned into Dilla clones at one point in time, even though that represents like 1% of Dilla's sound, right?
Yeah.
Everybody had to figure out how to get that shika, 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 shika. They had to figure it out. And a lot of it had to do with basically effing up the way the timing algorithm works inside a beat machine to get that to do that. Or we would do it by hand. So those sorts of things in other settings would look extremely inappropriate, right? And yet in our culture, in our context, it makes perfect sense to do that because the offness is the flavor. The offness is the sazon, right? And so if we don't tune into that, it's like the oxtails just aren't as tender. You know what I'm saying? And like the neck don't snap as hard and the people don't get as animated. So like, and because there's like that catalyst there, right? Because there's that catalyst of the emotional result of that very technical approach to making a beat, then in turn it influences the MC, the griot, right? So like it's like it sounds like magic, but it's kind of like when I watched Black Panther and I saw him ingest the purple plant and then unlock these magical powers that he had, right?
Yeah.
That's what it's like to use those techniques in the studio from a hip hop cultural context and unlock new superpowers that the MC didn't even know they had because the beat is tapping in to something that's subconscious, whether it's deeply rooted in the pineal gland somewhere or, otherwise stimulated by other forces in the universe. The bottom line is like we're 50% sorcerers and alchemists and the other half high-minded scientists and highly technical artisans, right? Like when we study cultures that we consider dead, right, that are gone, one of the things that you learn about when you study culture, right, is you evaluate cultures by the work of the artisans, right? Ooh, these are the first people we found that spun clay pots in the Middle East. And so therefore they must be using highly advanced techniques to do X, Y, and Z to get this result, right? Well, let's take it to now where we look at hip hop. The people that make the music, the people that operate the studios, they're the artisans, right? And so these are people whose techniques and approaches to using technology are highly informed by the cultural references and callbacks to things that, for example, like you'll be in a studio and people will be like, I don't want this to sound like a Curtis Blow record, right? And you're like, Lynn drum machine, you know what I'm saying? AKJ 414 microphone, very tight vocal sound, right? Like it pulls out these technical references from your mind, but there's a cultural call out to it where because of how we represent in the American framework as African-American, Afro-Latino, Afro-Caribbean people, our culture now in the modern age, in the age of modernity, is highly tied to technology. And so for me, without that piece attached to this conversation, it not only does a disservice to our culture, but it's a lie without it. Do you know what I'm saying? It's a lie.
Yeah.
You need the whole story.
Yeah.
Otherwise, somebody is simply taking a piece of equipment and putting blackface on it. And that's digital minstralism, and that's what we're being subjected to now with AI and everything else. And it's like you see how that's being exploited in ways that harm us, right? We're thinking about things right now that we weren't even thinking about 5 years ago all the time now.
Yeah.
Right? Stuff that was not in our minds has now been shifted, right? Where people were once thinking about opening businesses and how do you put your house in a trust so when you die, your kids don't pay taxes on a $400,000 property that you never intended for them. Now we're popping balloons. Now we're watching people run off with food stamps, and it's like half the time the content is fabricated, right? More like 75% of the time. So like the fact that somebody knows how to tap into your culture and speak to your worst being also means they know how to speak to your best being. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because
absolutely.
they found those bits and pieces of you and they decided to do that rather than, hey, let's go talk to these people that are still alive, by the way, and and tap in with them
Yeah,
and get their advice and get their perspective on things. There's so much to that. We could spend 4 hours just talking about what's been lost in the fire
for
that
sure.
actually we rescued. You know what I mean? Like if you watch Lovecraft Country, she gives Jesse's character the Bible,
Mm,
right? And that Bible unlocks their ability to defeat evil,
mm,
metaphorically, reality in the framework of the storyline, etc. But well, we have a Bible in hip hop. We have a
mm.
Bible of how to do things and what the path is and how these journeys will take us from here to there. This is what we used to have to do, and now we do this instead. But did we lose something along the way? So it's not like that information is dead. It's just that it's not being leveraged for
Right.
whatever reason. But I feel like it harms all of it in the long run. And like, so when people say, oh, there's only so much money left in it, actually, no, you can only exploit 1 micron of an idea for so long before it just peters out.
I want to kind of circle back to like the, I guess, the genesis of the Zulu, and why is it called Zulu, first of all, and like how was that, like how was that informed by like culture?
Well, um, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. I got the end of the 70s and obviously all of the 80s. And there was this amazing miniseries that came on TV one year called Shaka Zulu.
Mm,
And Shaka Zulu, Unkosi, right? And he was like this feared, powerful brother that was not only like strong in the physical sense, but he was mentally strong, right? And was someone who had spears and sandals. Well, actually, no, they got rid of their sandals. Excuse me. They had shields and spears and military strategy employed in formations that were able to, like, at many points in the British Empire's history, when they're trying to colonize South Africa, they were giving these people the business. They had
yeah,
cannons, for crying out loud,
yeah.
and men with spears and mines were, you know what I mean? Like, and they were like, we got to do something about the Zulus, right? And so when I thought about that, when I was trying to come up with a name for this technology that was meant to, in many ways, curate and preserve, right, why music sounds the way that it sounds in our framework, like how we think and imagine that music is supposed to sound, I began to kind of do like an internal self analysis of like, okay, well, the music industry exists, and I'm not afraid to say this, right? I'm sure there are many people who will want to debate with me because it threatens them. The reason that we have a music industry is because of people that look like me and you. You know that,
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
Like people showed up and said, "Hey, we're making recordings for the library. Do you mind if we record you on your porch?" And then they would run off and go print records and sell them, and maybe give you a glass of liquor for your time on the porch, right? Like they literally developed an entire business model around our pain, our suffering, our oppression, right? Our our musical and art and artistic expression through that, and they turned it into a way to commodify it. And so when I thought about it, I was like, well, dang, I wonder, besides when the Americans stole magnetic tape from the Nazis, right? Which is, of course, isn't that the American way? We steal technology and then we say we did something with it. When they turned analog tape into a much more widely used medium in the West, um, I'm thinking in the back of my head, I've always wondered if like some of the first recordings on tape weren't black people on their porches in the South,
Mm,
right? And I'm like, I'm looking at these old records that I used to have, like Lead Belly, right? And I forget his name, something Lemon, right? And there are these really old archival recordings of black pastors who are singing gospel and black bluesmen from way back in the day. And I'm like, man, analog tape and black music are married together in a very unique way, because it isn't long after that that the race records begin to circulate on radio once we get AM radio in America. And it
mm,
isn't that much longer after that before we get the jazz movement, right?
yeah.
Before we get blues, right? And then between jazz and blues and gospel, you get rock and roll with Little Richard, right? But you get Elvis. So
Hmm.
when I kept looking at this, I'm like, this is actually us,
Mm,
right? it's actually, this medium reflects our collective genius. Do you get what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah,
it actually
absolutely.
represents, in many ways, like it said that, people have, stereotype Native Americans as saying that photographs steal your spirit. Well,
Mm,
analog tape in many ways took our auditory essence and disseminated that
yeah,
on a large level across the world,
yeah,
right? And those analog tape recordings influenced every musician in the world, right? Like, you wouldn't have the Beatles if it wasn't for Willie Horton
yeah,
and Muddy Waters,
yeah.
right? Same thing with the Rolling Stones. I could go on, but my whole point is that the reason I named it Zulu was that you have like one of the baddest black mofos in the world in the history of war, right? Besides Hannibal,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And I'm looking at analog tape, and I'm looking at how, despite all the things that happened to those bluesmen, where they were getting paid pennies for their songs and they were being exploited from the beginning and robbed, right? And how even when hip hop first came out, how like those artists were used that way,
Hmm.
right? And how they're used that way now, right? I looked at it, I'm like, and yet we persevere, we continue to keep making this amazing music and keep spreading these messages and keep manifesting, right? And I'm like, analog tape and black music are the same thing. And so
Wow.
when I look at like the unwillingness to falter, right? And then I looked at Shaka Zulu, and now, even now, how in South Africa they talk about the Zulu spirit
Hmm.
and the power of Shaka Zulu. When Mandela is talking about Shaka Zulu, right? It's like,
Hmm.
that's us,
Yeah.
right? That's us. In my travels, South Africans have always been the ones who are the most down with African
Hmm.
Americans. Like,
Hmm.
they like all the, like, they don't play that, oh, like, we don't know anything about racism.
No, they
Like,
got a
nope.
similar struggle for sure.
Nope.
Yes.
So that was like my love letter to like
Hmm.
all things black that
Yeah.
are special and valid in music. And then beyond that, what was the cultural note that informed Zulu? Well, the first thing I ran through Zulu wasn't a sine wave. It was, can Zulu replicate an 808 a certain way, the way that I used to hear it come off of a tape machine? Can Zulu
Mm.
replicate what happens when you drive a 909 snare into overdrive and you start clipping and getting massaged by the analog tape
Mm.
along with the electronics in the machine, right? Like, that was the litmus test. It wasn't just uh does it replicate the square wave at 100 kilohertz, blah, 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 blah,
Right.
because that's been done before, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But the point is that, and I know that this is going to sound a little bizarre coming from me, but this is the way I used to buy equipment, was like, okay, let me bring my beat machine to the Guitar Center, and I'm going to plug it into this magic box that y'all want me to buy. And the first question I have is, why does everything below 150 hertz sound like it's not really doing anything?
Where's it at?
Where's the bass at?
Right.
I'm not making a Metallica record,
Right.
right? I want to be able to have something that can replicate R&B just as handily as it can replicate hip hop music.
Hmm.
So like, it had to handle the bass. It had to handle the dynamic range of all of the things that were, special to me. They were
Yeah.
like, on some level, the way a drum beat is supposed to sound is just as much technical as it is cultural for me,
Mm.
right? Like, if it's not making me do this, then I'm kind of like, nope, nope,
That ain't it.
pass,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So like, I was developing hip hop, Zulu, from the aspect of, if I hand this to another hip hop producer, right? Um, it has to pass the vibe check. You
Yes.
understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
And this is what's really dope, because I approached it from that angle, because I approached it from that angle, it is absolutely fantastic for every other genre.
Hmm.
So why is Zulu so popular in indie rock? Why is Zulu so popular in folk music? Why is Zulu so popular with regular old rock and roll? Because it works excellently there, but at the core of it is hip hop. So if it didn't do the thing for hip hop, I don't care what it sounds like on Steely Dan.
Yeah.
It had to sound right. So if I was going to make a Bomb Squad record, right? So when like Hank Shock Lee heard it, he's like, oh yeah, like, this is what I was hearing. Like, that's what I'm talking about. Like, we need to kind of get back into that mind frame of like, we should be the one saying yay or nay
Yeah.
to how something sounds,
Yeah.
right? Just like the old man in the 5 Heartbeats, right? If you don't get past him, you ain't getting on stage. And that's
Right.
what it kind of needs to come back. We need to start actually having ownership of our culture and being staunch in our beliefs. Like there's nothing wrong with saying, look, I make this for a living. This is my life. I've been doing it for, I mean, my God, I've been involved in some shape or fashion of hip hop music since I was 7. I'm 48 years old now. I think 41 years of experience counts for something
It does.
in the conversation of how something should sound, how it should make you feel, how it should make you react, how you use it, right? Because 9 years later, I was making hip hop music from a technical standpoint, right? So like all those things informed it. Even the way Zulu is laid out, where it's laid out more like a musical instrument than it is laid out like a piece of equipment. Well, we would take things that were just pieces of equipment and turn them into musical instruments. And MPC 60 wasn't made for us.
Right.
We adopted it. MPC 60 is the first thing that got invited to the cookout besides the Lindrum and, you know, all these other devices. We took it and made it for us because it was originally made to accompany guitar players.
Yes.
Right. So there's nothing wrong with taking that same mindset and say, well, what if you just took a piece of equipment that was for us by us? What do you do then? Right. And so that's what Zulu represents. It's like somebody finally from the camp broke free and said, I want to get into equipment.
Right.
And so that's where you have it. You know what I mean? And plus, like, you know, recall, being able to get the same sound every day, no matter what.
Yes.
All of that is involved in that.